Spotted in a science lab, among the technical equipment and humming computers, is a bottle of honey.
It's just processed store-bought honey. It's off the shelf, a little cute bear, so we can put it in photos.
It may be one of the weirder things you'll see in a lab, but researchers at Washington State University Vancouver say honey is key to what they're working on.
Because it is cheap and it is easily accessible to everyone.
It also has natural chemical properties that make it a promising foundation for a new kind of environmentally friendly computer component being developed right here in the Pacific Northwest. From the newsroom of OPB, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast about the place you call home. Today, we're bringing you the story of how one Northwest science lab is using honey to make faster, cleaner computers. Jess Burns, science reporter for OPB, learned much more about honey computing for her show, All Science, No Fiction. Jess, hello.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So can you help us imagine the science lab at WSU Vancouver? What's it like, and who are the researchers working on this project?
All right, so close your eyes and picture our shiny science fiction futures, right? Okay. These researchers are working in a clean room, right? So these are dust-free environments. Some of them are flooded with this super harsh yellow light that they need for certain scientific processes. Everyone's wearing head-to-toe protective gear, not to protect you from the equipment, to protect the equipment from you, basically, right? So they're trying to keep everything super clean because they're working with computer components, right? And, you know, I'm wearing that gear. My videographer, Dan Evans, he's also wearing the gear, and he's like lugging camera equipment. And it's just, it's quite the scene for sure. Yeah. No, it was really cool though. That was my second time in a clean room, and I kind of dig it. Like, it's really, I wouldn't want to spend every day there, but you know, a few hours once in a while, I'm just like, yeah, this is cool.
Yeah, right on.
So working in this lab, we have the research lead. His name is Feng Zhao.
Feng Zhao.
Then there's Mehdi Tanim.
My name is Mohammad Mehdi Hassan Tanim.
And there's Zoe Templin.
Zoe Templin.
And basically, these three are developing honey-based computer components they hope are going to transform the way computers are designed and made.
Yeah, so let's turn to the actual computer part the team is building. It is called a memristor. Now, I'm no computer scientist, but I have never heard of this before. So what is it, first of all? And how does honey play a part in building this component?
Okay, I hadn't heard about it before either, so don't feel bad.
Okay.
And I want to start off, I'm going to say something a little controversial because I just did a big story on this. Memristor is a horrible word. It's the worst word. Like, I mean, it's a portmanteau, right? It's memory and resistor.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, but then they were like, oh, let's just stick those together and make memristor. It doesn't exactly like roll off the tongue. To me, sorry, scientists, this is why there are people who name products and it's not named by scientists.
These are the deep conversations that the listeners of The Evergreen want and need. So thank you.
So the whole time, every time I say memristor, I'm just like, oh, can't we come up with a better word for that? But okay, so second, memristors are really hard to understand. And so if you're listening to this and it feels like magic, know that it still kind of feels like magic to me as well, because it is so hard to wrap your head around. So I'm gonna give it a go. So honey, the way they use honey is the substance in this circuit that controls the flow of electricity. It kind of acts like a conductor, semiconductor, and insulator kind of all in one. I'm just going to be simplifying so much. So there's going to be electrical engineers out there and they'll be like, nope, that's not quite right. But I'm really trying to break it down into the way that I think someone who's not steeped in that world could understand it. With this honey, you can engineer it into having these memristive qualities. It's an even worse word. It's behaving like a memory depending on how much electricity is applied to it.
So they have a big molecule chains in the material. And we need those molecule chains in order for us to make our devices.
And I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. How did the idea of using something like honey in computers come about in the first place?
Yeah, so Feng has been, I'm just going to call him Feng because we're buds. He's excellent. He's a head researcher. He started working on this project about 8 years ago, maybe even a little bit before, and they were trying all kinds of different substances. They knew that carbohydrates like sugars would potentially have the properties that they were looking for. So they went through things like fructose, they went through glucose, they tried pectin, they even tried aloe vera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they were looking at all of the things, but honey, they ended up giving them the best result. And so they pushed forward with research on honey.
Honey might seem a bit out of place in a science lab, especially in a lab making computer parts. But the researchers in the lab say one of the benefits of using honey is that it is more environmentally friendly. For one thing, it doesn't have to be dug up out of a mine. Thank you, bees. For another thing, it's easy to get rid of.
Electronics in general produce so much toxic waste. Like, it really is a devastating amount of electronic waste that occurs.
It's true. The world produces about 50 million tons of electronic waste per year. Only 20% of it is recycled, meaning the other 80% ends up in landfills. Using honey instead of materials like silicon and computers would make recycling easier and less toxic because
honey is different, right? So how do you get rid of honey? You put it in water. I mean, they seriously just like, when we were there, they had the chip that they were testing. They said, do you want to see it dissolve? And I was like, yes, we want to see it dissolve. And they had a beaker and they just put it in the beaker. And then we sat there and watched it. And just like the natural like convection currents in the water, all of a sudden, all the little metal pieces that were on there just started floating up. And it was like this snow globe. And you didn't hardly have to like even agitate it to get it to happen. It just kind of disintegrated. And they were like, yeah, then you could go through and filter out all the metal and you would just have your metal. This is all it takes, basically.
I would love to see this become a stepping stone to having electronically clean waste and actually getting organic materials out into your phone, into commercial use.
That's wild. And so while you were in the lab, the researchers showed you how it works.
We are going to drop honey on it.
I love a good science demo. So, Jess, what did the process actually look like?
Super simplified again. So, first they need to create the electrodes, the layout of the electrodes. And they do this with this super cool machine. It's called a sputter.
Ooh.
And it uses and I had to get them to say it like 10 times for me to understand, like S-P-U-T-T-E-R. And so this thing, sends plasma at a block of metal, and the metal vaporizes and kind of rises up through the chamber, and it just sticks into the blank spots of a mold above. So after they do that, they have their little metal layout. They put a layer of honey on it. They centrifuge it down so it spins out super evenly and super thin. There's another layer of electrodes on top because you need metal and then honey and then metal. And then they bake it. I mean, They just got an oven. I mean, it's not super hot. They just bake it because they're trying to dry it out, basically, and like the way you would dehydrate food.
Okay, that makes sense. So, we're talking about memristors again. What makes the memristor unique when we're thinking of the broader world of electronics?
So one way of thinking about memristors is that it is bio-inspired, or at least that it mimics biology, so biological systems. Memristors essentially mimic the way our neurons, so our processors are in our brain, and specifically the synapses, which are the bridges that form between your neurons, that is your memory, basically.
Okay.
It's like that's how we keep information in our brains, to use technical terms, and so these things basically store and process information all in the same place. And that's a huge, huge deal. And it's why our brains are really so efficient.
Our neurons and the synapse, they process data and they store data at the same time.
The computers we have now, they separate out these two processes into different locations. And that's one of the reasons why the computers we have now are slower, relatively slow. They require a lot of energy to work.
Got it. So the team's memristor that they are, developing using honey, like we've been talking about, works the same way? How?
A new piece of information comes, travels through the neuron. When we hear that piece of information, it forms a bridge through the synapse that connects to another neuron. And that's that piece of information. And the more that you hear the information, say you hear a string of numbers.
Song lyrics.
Yeah, exactly. You got little bridges. And the more you do, the more robust those bridges become, right? Mm-hmm. And they stay even when and our memory is right, they remain there even when that information stops, right? You can come back and retrieve that information because of that bridge that's there. Memristors kind of work the same way. You put electricity to them, and so that's information in computer. In any system, electricity is the information. And once a certain amount of electricity is applied, it makes a bridge. So in traditional computers, the basic unit of function is a transistor.
Okay.
And a transistor is a switch, and it's either on or off. And on is 1, off is 0. And that's why you get the binary, right? Of on, off,
exactly.
on, off, okay? So with memristors, on is there's a bridge, off is there's no bridge. But the thing is, unlike transistors, where when the electricity turns off, the bridge goes away, once that bridge is formed with memristors, you turn off electricity and the bridge stays.
We are building systems of memory that are as efficient as how the brain stores memory.
Oh, because it's the memory.
It's the memory.
It remembers.
It remembers, right? It remembers.
Got it.
And so one way you can think about it, the bridge is the memory. The process of forming the bridge is the processor. And so this is when I say the processing and the memory are in the same spot. This is what I mean. And so it just allows everything to be much more compact and happen in much less space overall.
Okay, thank you for walking us through that. Coming up after the break, can a computer mimic a brain? A question you had during your reporting was, if you have a computer component that mimics a brain cell, could you put a bunch of them together and get a computer that mimics a brain? And, perhaps in the cinematic universe of the Terminator.
Now, don't take this the wrong way, but you are a Terminator, right?
Yes. Cyberdyne Systems Model 101.
You're really real. I mean, you're like a machine underneath, right? But sort of alive outside?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
But as far as the real world, did you find out the answer to your question?
I did get an answer. So memristors are a really key component of a new kind of computing system called neuromorphic computing. And those computers are modeled on how our brain works. Like the structures are the same. And, floating around in our head, we have the most efficient computers on the planet. Like the amount of information we can store and we can process for the amount of energy it takes us to do it, it's ridiculous. Our brains are so much more efficient than anything else we got out there. So it follows definitely that an architecture that mimics our brain is going to do it. And the memristor is pretty key to that.
Right now, our device simulate single neuron, single synapse. But we want to integrate those devices together, and then this will behave more like our brain.
Yeah, and you mentioned neuromorphic computing. Mm-hmm. The lab team also says this is the same idea behind neuromorphic computing, which is a new revolution in computer design. Here's master's student Mehedi Taneem talking about it.
It's a building block. Like this is a synapse from my brain. So by combining millions of devices like this, then I can build a neuromorphic chip, which can actually do the computation that a supercomputer can do, but within 100 times faster and using 1,000 times less energy.
So can you tell us a little bit more about this and why it's significant in this design versus, how things have operated in the past?
The laptop in front of you, your cell phone, right? Mm-hmm. They're all based on this structure, this architecture, as it's called, that was designed 80 years ago, right? It was like coming out of World War II. And it's called the Van Neumann architecture. And these computers depend on those transistors that I was talking about to do their work. Silicon is the material that is the most commonly used in transistors. So I'm going to take this in two different directions. One of it is just something I think is kind of fascinating. And then the one is more to your point. How about that?
I love fascinating things and things that are to my point.
Okay,
so
there it is.
I'm
going to satisfy both things, right? Okay, so there is a law called Moore's Law. Do you know Moore's Law? You've probably heard reference to it. It's this idea in computing that the number of transistors in basically a computer chip or an integrated circuit is going to double every 2 years, right? And this is how we get faster and cheaper computers. And there's been some bumps along the way since computers came about, but pretty much it's really stuck on that trajectory. It's pretty close to holding. With that, let's do a little bit of, I would say, back of napkin math.
Ooh, okay.
Okay. So a hair on your head, okay, we're going to start with something arbitrary. A hair on your head is 50 micrometers wide, so a hair, right? Right now, the smallest transistor that's being made is between 2 and 3 nanometers. So that's 25,000 times smaller than the width of a hair on your head.
Ooh,
so we're talking,
right.
So these are, a computer chip is an amazing thing. So that's 2 or 3 nanometers. An atom of silicon, right, which these things are made of and require, is 0.2 nanometers, okay? So we're going to stick with Moore's Law. And if Moore's Law holds, then, and there's a lot of debate whether Moore's Law is actually bogus or if it's the right law to take us into the future. But if that holds, we'll be seeing transistor sizes smaller than a single atom of silicon in 6 to 10 years, right? Well, you can't have a silicon transistor that's smaller than an atom of silicon because then it's not silicon anymore, right? Right. So, you see that there's kind of an issue here. People are working on a way around this for sure, but it does look like there is a bit of a bottleneck ahead for how much faster our current computers can get. So that's one point, right? No doubt that they're going to do some workarounds, but we're reaching the limits of we're getting into quantum territory, subatomic territory. And once you do that, everything we know about the physical world kind of flips on its head and it has its own laws. And so you got to work with that. That's one thing. So there's a bottleneck a-coming, right?
Right.
The other piece that's more to your point is that I mentioned this before, but just by virtue of how this Van Neumann architecture is built, that you have memory in one place, you have a processor in another, and every time that the processor needs to get a piece of memory, it has to send electricity out to get it, and then it brings it back, and then it sends it out and brings it back. We're very small, but the amount of different processes and access when it just multiplies, and so you have. One, it takes a lot more time. It takes a lot of time to get it. And, time is relative, but it takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of electricity because you're having to send electricity back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So in neuromorphic computers with the memristors, the memory and processing are all in one place. So you're saving a lot on time and you're saving a lot on electricity by doing it. And when I heard those numbers, I confirmed those numbers that Mehdi said, and they are right there with estimates of how much of an improvement these systems are going to eventually be. And it's astounding.
Yeah. Okay. So faster And cleaner.
And cleaner.
And more energy efficient.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Jess, after all the time you've spent researching this, learning about it from scientists, seeing demonstrations of how it would work, and breaking it down on this very podcast, why do you think what this team is creating is so significant?
So one thing is, I think, a little bit more on the poetic side, is that occasionally things come along at the elegant solution. And this just seems like one of those things that you're just like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense on so many levels. Like, we're talking about the source of honey versus the source of, metals and minerals in computers. We're talking about the potential for clean electronics in there after you finished using them, right? And that energy savings that could come with AI. And I think that's really significant at the moment that we are in right now. So one is climate change. Energy for the most part worldwide is based on fossil fuels. This is not good for our climate. We need to stop doing this. The other thing is that just in the past year, AI has exploded. Artificial intelligence has exploded. Artificial intelligence to run this software is extremely energy efficient. I saw a figure in the New York Times about that in a few years, the electricity needs of artificial intelligence is going to be equivalent to the energy needs of Argentina.
Whoa.
Right?
Okay.
You're like, this is not a small country, right? No, this is like a solidly middle-sized country.
Dang.
The electricity needs. And so we're at a moment when we're looking out on the horizon of our computing that powers our lives, right? We are dependent on it, is about to need a lot of electricity. At the same time, when we don't want to be using as much electricity or using cleaner electricity, but you're putting stress on a system that may require us to continue to burn more and more fossil fuels. So with these two things paired together, I think the idea that you could get 100 times faster and 1,000 times less energy, well, that sounds pretty good right now.
Honestly, it does not surprise me to hear that an idea like this has come out of the Pacific Northwest, right?
Oh, I know. Totally. And that was, this whole lab group, that was one of their driving ethoses was, we want to produce environmentally conscious computer components. Zoe in particular, this was a big deal for her.
I'm actually extremely fortunate to have been raised and grown up in the Pacific Northwest that cares about the environment to this level where I can do research that could truly help the environment in a way that really hasn't been explored before.
Yeah. Well, shout out to bees, right? Jess, thank you so much for coming through and helping us break all this down.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
Jess Burns is a science reporter for OPB and the producer of the Northwest Science show All Science, No Fiction. You can check out her video and read her full story on honey computing at opb.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. If you're here listening right now, you are part of our brand new podcast family. Help us grow by leaving a review on your favorite podcast app, including YouTube. Follow us there, and hey, tell your friends. Mia Estrada produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. He engineered this episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Julie Sabatier and Sage Van Wing. Jess Burns and Dan Evans did the interviews you heard. Our theme music comes from Audio Network. If you have a question for us, please hit us up. You can reach us by email at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later. I was telling Jess earlier, I did watch Terminator 2 last night, specifically because I knew that we were And it was so good.
That scene where Linda Hamilton is doing pull-ups.
Oh my God, yes.
I know. I think that's what I knew I was a lesbian.
The origin story. I love it. Love it. Love it.
Maybe not quite, but I mean, holy crap.